There are many different personality theories, with one being the trait theory. The trait theory assumes that individuals differ in their traits due to genetic differences, and it says that traits are innate, stable, and enduring characteristics that allow behaviour to be predicted. There are also a number of different approaches to the trait theory, with the first one being Allport's 4000 trait theory. This dates back to 1936, when Allport picked out 4,000 words which he thought could define who we are as a person. With these words, he was able to categorize them into 3 distinct categories, one being central traits, one being secondary traits, and the last being cardinal trait. The central traits were 4,000 were the ones that he thought were needed to be able to define us as a person, with secondary traits being the less influential characteristics. These characteristics would be more situational and depend on the environment that the individual was in and on their surroundings. And lastly, Allport noted that one central trait would emerge as a dominant trait compared to the others, and this trait was then called a cardinal trait, which is known as the individual's defining trait that is more important than the rest of the other characteristics. Theorists then began to believe that Allport's 4000 trait theory was quite impractical for applications, and this resulted in Raymond Cattell narrowing the number of traits down. In order to do this, he went through the list of traits created by Allport, and was able to combine certain traits together which were similar, and could eliminate traits that were either unnecessary or were deemed too rare in certain individuals. As a result, he was able to narrow down the number of traits to 171, and then put these 171 traits through a factor analysis method, which is a special statistical analysis, into a small group of people. And through this, he was then able to narrow down the results to just 16 traits. After doing this, he was then able to create the 16 personality factor assessment method, which is one of the most common personality tests known today. Cattell also argued that in order to get a full picture of a person's personality, you have to look at 3 different types of data. One is L data, which stands for life data. The second is Q data, which stands for questionnaire designed to test personality. And the last is T data, which is objective tests. The main way of evaluating a personality through personality tests is via self-reporting. And an example of this is the MMPI test, which stands for Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory. This test has improved dramatically since the 1930s, and now not only psychologists are able to identify an individual's behaviour by letting them rate their behaviour on a scale, but it also lets the psychologists understand the individual's likelihood of lying, faking, or being defensive. Another approach to trait theory is Eysenck's trait theory. He was able to narrow down Cattell's 16 personality traits even further by categorizing them into 3 main areas. His studies showed that not everybody showed signs of behaviour that would fit into the category of introversion or extroversion, or neuroticism, emotional stability. Neuroticism is the study of psychology categorized by fear or anxiety. As a result, of the traits not fitting into these two categories, he then created the third category, which was called psychotism. Over the years, many believed that Alport's theory was too inclusive, whereas Eysenk's category was too narrow. But many psychologists have agreed to accept the scale in order to rate a personality from extroversion to introversion. In addition to this, many have now settled upon 5 main traits to define a personality, which are known as the Big Five. It is well known as the acronym of OCEAN, which stands for openness, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. There are a variety of different strengths and weaknesses for the trait theory. One major strength is the fact that it is very understandable and straightforward, and as a result, this means that it can be implemented easily among lots of different patients. Not only this, but it also relies on hard data and statistical data. This is a benefit because it means that the experience of the psychologist or theorist are not taken into account, as well as the tendencies and emotions of the psychologist are not taken into account. In addition, the trait theory tests can also be used to help guide a student into a suitable career path. For example, the Moresby test is one example of a test that helps to identify the type of environment which would be suitable for a student to work in. However, there are also other negatives to this trait theory. For example, it does not account for changing personalities over time, because people do not always behave according to the tendencies shown in the personality tests. In addition to this, the trait theory does not account for situational factors, so it does not take into account the influence of the environment that they're in and their surroundings. For example, one person could be behaving one way in a situation where there's not many people, but then it would change when they are surrounded by a crowd of people. It is also not an accurate predictor of a sports performance. And finally, the negative is that it does not address how or why the trait has developed. And lastly, there are limitations in reliability of the personality trait theory, since many people could lie on a personality test. A second personality theory is the social learning theory. This was created by Albert Bandura in 1977, who agrees with the behaviourist learning theories of operant and classical conditioning. He also believes in a term called reciprocal determinism, where the world and the person's behaviour cause one another. He believed this because at the time of studying adolescent aggression, his studies made him feel that the term behaviourism, which states that the environment causes a person's behaviour, is too simplistic, and therefore considered that there's a link between the environment, behaviour, and a person's psychological ability to process information, which is all known together as observational learning. Observational learning has 4 conditions in order to occur. These are attention, retention, motor reproduction, and motivation. Attention states that in order to be able to copy the action, attention is needed, and there are numerous factors that can affect attention levels, which include distractions, arousal levels, complexity of the task, and also the ability of the senses. Moreover, it's also important that the performer can selectively attend to the relevant information being shown. Retention is where the performer needs to be able to remember what the observer paid attention to. This stage usually involves mental rehearsal, cognitive thought, and mental images. We then move on to motor reproduction, where the observer reproduces a skill using their own body. And then there's motivation, where this means having a reason to copy a task. If a realistic goal is not set or the task has no relevance, then it's likely that the observer will become demotivated, lose the ability to selectively attend relevant information, and therefore become distracted and unable to copy the skill. Some conditions help for observational learning to occur. For example, being the same gender, a powerful role model, or a figure with high status. This was all noticed through the Dole experiment, where children were put in a room after watching adults, and it noticed that the same gender resulted them in copying the actions of the adults. There are a variety of different positives and negatives for this theory. One positive is that it gives an insight as to why young people get involved in sport and choose a particular lifestyle. This will be through copying professional athletes, for example, that are shown in the media. However, on the negative side, biologists argue that the theory completely ignores the biological state of the body and of the observer, and it ignores the differences in the individuals due to genetics, brain function, and learning differences, and does not account for genetically inherited characteristics. Biologist theorists argue that if a person were to witness a violent murder, the responses would come from the autonomic nervous system. For example, increased blood pressure, fainting, and increased heart rate would all be possible symptoms of this, and therefore the symptoms and behaviour in the situation have not been learned but have been inherited, and this therefore contradicts the social learning theory. Many people also believe that the Bobo Dole experiment was morally wrong and unethical. A study conducted by Feshbach and Singer was able to contradict the social learning theory. This study occurred over 6 weeks and compared juvenile boys who watch violent television as well as boys who watch non-violent television. At the end of the 6 weeks, it was found that the boys watching the non-violent television shows were more likely to be more violent. This resulted in the conclusion that watching violent TV shows allows the viewer to relate to the characters through the violent acts, and therefore release all violent emotions and thoughts through relation, which is known as the catharsis effect. And this can provide evidence that the social learning theory does not work on some cases. The interactions theory is the third personality theory. It is an explanation of behaviour that assumes our personality depends on our traits and our environment. So therefore is a crossover between the social learning theory and also the trait theory. This theory is based on the work of Hollander in 1967, who showed that personality has 3 levels that interact. These are the psychological core, typical responses, and role-related behaviour. The psychological core is the most internal of the levels, and it is the most difficult to research. It is also described as the inner true self of an individual. The typical responses are changeable and learned behaviours that become modified due to the environment and the surroundings of an individual. And the role-related behaviour is the most changeable and the most external and dynamic of the 3 levels. For example, an individual may have to alter between a coach, a student, and also a friend within one day, which shows that their behaviour is going to have to change depending on the situation that they are in. A formula was devised to give an understanding of the interactionist theory. This formula was B equals FP times E, where B is behaviour, F is the function of, and P is personality traits, and E is the environment that we are in. This means that behaviour equals the function of our personality traits multiplied by the environment that we are in. Once again, there are some positives and negatives of this theory. One positive is that it supports that typical responses emerge in relation to different environmental situations, and therefore this makes behaviour unpredictable. And as a result, it also helps to explain why personalities of sports performers can change depending on can change in different situations. Bowers of 1977 believes that the interactionist theory explains twice as much as the trait theory and social learning theory put together. However, there are some negatives. One negative is the fact that it is complex, as there are unlimited combinations of personality and environmental factors. An example of this is where a performer may perform well under the leadership of a captain during one game, but in another, the same leadership causes an aggressive response, but this aggressive response would be due to environmental factors previously, such as lack of sleep or frustration. Overall, I think that the interactionist theory is the best theory because it takes into account both traits that are inherited from birth, but also our experiences through the environment and our surroundings whilst in sport, and therefore shows that our characteristics and personalities can change, whereas the trait theory does not show this, and the social learning theory doesn't take into account our innate characteristics. So yeah,